businesses are very excited about it, right? They see the potential of how this could change the game for how they operate. The way I see it in the future, AI is going to be the operating system for a company.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Simply Augmented, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to Shift AI, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Karthik Ramakrishnan as our guest. Karthik is the Chief Product Officer of Armilla AI, a startup that empowers enterprises to test and fix their AI models to ensure they release trustworthy products to the market. If you're someone interested in responsible AI and how companies can protect their IP when using this technology, you won't want to miss this episode. It's great to have Karthik on our podcast, and we can't wait to learn more. Let's get to it. All right, Karthik, thank you for joining. Super excited to have you on the show today.
Likewise, thanks, Boaz.
So I want to start. I was reading through your history and your experience, and I always start the show with a little bit of background. Really interesting background. So MBA from the Richard Ivey School of Business, and then spent many years in startups and was co-founder and CTO of Gazoo Mobile, director in product innovation at Extreme Labs, went to Hatch Labs, was the GM and director of product development, and then the co-founder and head of product at Blue Trumpet, which looks like it was acquired by Breaktime Studios, GM of Poncho, and then CEO and co-founder of Gallup Labs. It sounds like Gallup Labs was doing algorithms and other kinds of things for Facebook ads and some marketing related content there. And then became senior manager at Deloitte, and then advisor at Perpetual Labs, and then VP head of industry solutions and advisor at Element AI. And that was from 2017 to 2020. So you've been doing AI and machine learning, and then currently co-founder, chief product officer at Armilla, and CEO and co-founder at Armilla Insurance. So we're going to talk more about that today. Very long, interesting career. Did I get everything right?
Yeah, so I was doing my master's in electrical engineering at the University of Waterloo, and Redney was a startup that came out of the alumni of University of Waterloo. So ran into them, and they said, "Why don't you come on board and we can productize what you built?" And so while I was thinking of actually going and doing a PhD in neural networks, and 20 years ago, no one cared about neural networks wasn't really what it is today. But so I decided to take that experience and spent 7 years there. Went from product manager to running the Middle East and Africa operations. We went IPO over those 7 years. So it was a fantastic experience building a company from the ground up, and have been chasing that high ever since in all the things that I've been doing.
That's amazing. That process, to see that from the beginning all the way through IPO, must have been incredible.
Absolutely. There's so many challenges. It is never a dull day, let's put it that way. And growth comes with its own highs, but it also comes with a lot of things that you have to get right, to make sure that things are on track. But yeah, it was a fantastic experience.
So that sounds like it was an early experience, but I want to go back in time. What was the first job that you had where you actually got paid?
Just after I finished high school, this is in the 90s, so computers were still not a thing, or just starting to become a thing. So I grew up in the Middle East, which is where my parents were. So over the summer break, I ended up building computers, and I ended up selling one to my dad's company. So I don't know if that was a preferential treatment, but I ended up selling 5 of them into his company, and then just before I go to university. So yeah, that was my first job.
Yeah, that's real money, making computers. Well, it's a good segue. The show is a lot about AI, but it's also about work and how meaningful work is to us and what work's going to look like in the future. So I always like to know what your parents did for work, and also if business was something that was talked about in the family, and if it was talked about at the dinner table. So what does your mom do for work? What does your dad do for work?
My mom was a teacher. Dad was, I think, an accidental entrepreneur. So he ended up putting together one of the first recycled paper manufacturing plants in the Middle East, in Dubai. This was in the 80s. So, water is you don't get wood, so you have to do recycled. And so he put up the first one in Dubai, put up the largest one in Saudi, put up a different one in Kuwait. So that's where he spent most of his career. So much of what I remember, there was talk of business, but it wasn't like a thing. It was just, but I would just casually mention, what he was doing, and it was, we would talk about the day, right? What happened. So he would just share, like, this is what I'm. It was very organic. It wasn't like a lesson of sorts, but I always saw how hard my dad worked. And I think for me, what fascinated was building something from nothing. Essentially, the picture I would see is like he would go into the space, all sand and dunes in the desert, and then 2 years later, there would be a humming manufacturing plant. And so to me, that was fascinating how that happened.
Yeah, literally nothing, sand to something. That's amazing. So your career has been spent at 0 to 1 companies, helping others grow their companies. Obviously, the 0 to IPO was definitely, being part of that team. But now you're the CEO of a company. Talk about what you're doing now. I mean, I'd also like to hear what excites you about the startup world. But
yeah, as you noted, I've spent the last decade or more working in and around data science, right? Today it's all called AI, but it wasn't called that 12 years ago. But you're really using data to drive decisions, and you're using data to derive insights that you can action against. And with my first startup that I did, Blue Trumpet from Hatch Labs, it was an ad network, and we had to use the data that was coming in. We were doing mobile advertising, and so really data was a big deal, right? Looking at the metrics and app placements and performance. My second company was we also did something very similar. So looking at behavioral data, what users were doing within mobile apps or digital properties, and then being able to predict what they would do next. And so today, again, that we called it the AI company. Back then, we called it the next best action platform. But product managers and marketers could understand what their users within their applications are doing to then take the right action. Like, who's churning? Who's going to engage? Who's going to engage? Who's ripe for monetization? And so you could then nudge them in the right direction to make your app more attractive or sticky. We really got into more sophisticated algorithms, right? This is the age of neural networks. What really happened there was you had these algorithms that could do so much more. They could learn by themselves. So that exposed me in working with companies like Toyota, HSBC, working with the regulators, were fascinated by what these models could do, but had a big challenge in trusting them. So here's a rub on AI. No model, no probabilistic model by its very nature, probability, it is never 100% accurate. Your accuracy peaks out at some point, right? It could be 95%, it could be 80%. And then you eke out further gains. But then companies today put those models into production, and but they're very worried about when these models go off the rails. How can we trust them to make decisions for us if there are bad outcomes? So that really, this is consistent across the board. And so we said, my co-founder and I, Dan, he'd seen similar issues. And so we said, okay, why don't we build a platform that can establish trust? And what does trust even mean for a model? And so we built a platform at Armilla, essentially, over the last few years, that can go into a model, the data, the predictions that it's making, and understand where it works really well and the areas where it doesn't work really well. And are there things that we can do to improve those aspects that don't do well? And so that you can quantify what doesn't work well. You can essentially nudge it in the right direction as well to work well. And so now you're not eking out performance. You can make some substantial gains. And today we're still bothered by that, right? In the sense, you can get to 95% accuracy, but what about the other part, the 5% that doesn't work? What can you do about those risks? So that's really what we built at Armilla, to understand the risks of AI models and help companies absorb those risks better.
So give an example to the audience of some of the limitations of LLMs. I mean, obviously these are powerful, powerful things, but what are some of the limitations that you've run up against? And give an example of a company that has dealt with some of these things.
The limitations come from many dimensions. So there's not one. For what we've seen already, things like bias. Everyone cares about bias. A lot of people do, and if you're image generators, we've seen, if you put in a term for a CEO, it basically shows, Caucasian males or just males in general, right? If you put in, if you ask an LLM without certain tonality, it had a liberal bias, for example. The model is just biased in that direction. So there's those type of challenges. Then there's hallucination, just frankly the wrong outputs. In fact, we did this test yesterday. We asked ChatGPT 3.5, are there any countries in Africa starting with the letter K? GPT 3.5 said, you're right, there are no countries starting with the letter K. GPT 4.0, that's been fixed. And it says, well, here's 3 countries. You're wrong. Here's 3 countries that actually start with the letter K. So, but bad output is an issue. And there's other issues behind as well. Things like sensitive data. So would an LLM end up exposing private data than it should? Is there, and of course we're seeing this too, copyrighted information with what the model's been trained on? Is that data actually publicly available? Does the developer of the model have the rights to access and train against data sets that they may not have ownership over? And so we're seeing a range of these issues. And one of the things that we've done at Armilla is just launched something called Auto AI. And what that does is essentially test the LLM model against these various dimensions. And you can choose the dimensions you care about as a company. So as you train an LLM model to customize it to your own needs on your own data, you can test it against these various sort of dimensions. And then we go a step further and we go and retrain or fine-tune that model automatically against kind of diminishing those bad outcomes. So those are some of the things that we're doing from an LLM perspective. The one thing I would note is AI is not LLM. AI is much broader. LLMs are based on neural networks, but you have simpler versions of those. So there's many different types of AI, and so we need to worry about how do we test and diminish those risks from those types of models as well. So we look at it more holistically, but LLMs are certainly top of mind today.
So when you think about businesses embracing this technology, and obviously there's a frenzy right now to understand use cases and how does this really pertain to me? How do you think about businesses embracing this technology today, given your background and you've been doing this a long time, you understand both AI, LLMs, and machine learning. What are you the most excited about? How do you see businesses moving forward?
Businesses are very excited about it, right? They see the potential of how this could change the game for how they operate. The way I see it in the future, AI is going to be the operating system for a company. I think we'll go towards a self-driving organization of the future. Right now, they're excited about it. However, the risks of these models are top of mind. I'll give you a perfect example. If you have an anomaly detection model in manufacturing and it detects defects in parts coming out of the manufacturing line, if it goes off the rails, now suddenly you have a bunch of parts that have come out which were considered deemed good, but were not. The model misclassified them. You now have this downstream effect that can go end up in cars, and it could cause physical damage to human beings. And then there's the financial impact of a product recall. So the implications of these failures are big, and so they are tentatively taking their steps. There are use cases which are very obvious you can go into, but when these high material use cases that drive businesses, there is tentative steps that they're taking into adopting. And until we address that issue of getting to really good models and maintaining good models over time, that will always be the case. LLMs, much as there's lots of excitement, we're still tentatively stepping into it. Most organizations have banned generative AI use in their organizations, but they're all in POC, they're testing it, they see the value. I think it will take some time before large scale or en masse adoption is triggered.
Can we double down a little bit on the term that you use, the self-driving organization, the self-driving operating system, but in the context of humans in the loop? I really want to explore that a little bit because I think that you recognize, and you just mentioned that humans are going to be involved at the beginning, asking the right questions, and at the end and checking the results to make sure that things are good before they go out the door. So when you think about the self-driving operating system, can you talk more about that?
And this is, we know this well. So there's three levels of systems that we have in an organization today, right? Your systems of record, your databases where all the information is stored. You have systems of engagement. So your applications that write on those databases, your Salesforce, your CRM, your HR modules, etc. Right? So all these applications. Now, what will happen on top of that is we are building literally the systems of intelligence, which is taking the data, rides on top of the application, understands what's going on, and will make predictions as to what needs to get done. Today, that system of intelligence is the human. We are slowly but surely automating a lot of those cognitive functions that a human does, and that will be more and more taken over by an AI. So think about this. Over time, an organization, let's take down a bank, my favorite example. But you have the marketing department, you have the product definition department, you have the sales department, and all of that in, let's say, mortgage lending. The product team goes and says, well, we're going to launch this new lending product. Here's what it does. The AI takes all the data, designs what this lending product should be. So you have product design AI. Leverage the system of record to then make that model, puts it into the system of engagement through an interface with the human, but then there's intelligence writing behind it. Then you have a marketing model whose objective function is to say, this is the type of client that we're looking for. This is the good risk that we're looking for. Now go market to that. Give it that objective function. It will leverage all of its systems of record and engagement to go find more of those clients. And then you have the risk and compliance control function, which will have its own AI, which is looking at the risk portfolio of your portfolio of risk in the lending that you've done. And you can now interconnect. Today, they're in silos, but over time, they would be connected. So if you're seeing more risk come on, i.e. bad loans, you're getting defaults, something happened, it will set a signal to the product definition function model to say, hey, if any more loans come like this, reject them. It will also send a signal to the marketing model to say, do not go attract this type of customer. You need to refine your target, too much risk. And so now all of that that's our view of a self-driving organization. Now we come to the question of where do humans play a role here? I think they will just get augmented. I do not see humans being replaced. Certainly, some jobs will go away. Absolutely agree. But it's going to open up a whole new set of jobs and skills that we need.
When you think about some of these issues and the risks, are you also involved in regulation and the policy around this? I know that there's a lot of politicians and entities that are diving in and really trying to figure out how to protect people, but also how this is all going to work inside companies and then also for consumers. Are you thinking about that and talking to policymakers about that?
Absolutely. I think regulations will play a role in ensuring that the most responsible technology is brought out, especially AI, which has a potential to even a small error in the model being disseminated very quickly to a large group of people. So the impacts are pretty big, even for small errors. So regulations will play a role. We spend a lot of time with standards bodies, for instance. We also spend a lot of time talking to regulators as to what their thoughts are and helping them think this through. Regulators depend on folks like us in the industry to give them the real feedback. So we play a role in the backgrounds in many of these things. We spend a lot of time, and we think it's important, right? Because it will affect how this technology gets rolled out. I will draw a distinction, though. There's two types of risks. One is the big doom and gloom existential risk of AI that gets talked about, and unfortunately, like it's getting a lot more attention than some of the more immediate risks of that are presented by AI. Just 2 years ago, the Dutch government had to resign because the tax department used a model to go after fraudulent child welfare benefit claims, and it became a pretty big scandal that the government had to resign. Those are more immediate issues that impact folks today. Real world impact. There's financial losses that can occur as a result of any of these ones. What are we doing for the short term? The long-term existentialism risk is, a concern. It's not here today. There's clear present danger today. If we don't address those, we may not have a future to talk about.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about that. And you're one of the first that's come on to talk about some of the risks and some of the security. When you think out into the future, the next 5 to 10 years, my sense is that you're an optimist about AI, but you want it done in the right way. So when you think about the emerging tech that's going to come out in the next, knowing what you know, what comes to mind?
Absolute. I mean, yes, you're right. I am an absolute optimist on this particular technology for many, many reasons, right? For all of the dangers, issues that models have, the benefits that it can provide far outweigh the risks that it presents once we start addressing those risks. It is going to be everywhere. And, from education to our healthcare to even addressing some of our climate issues that are going on, to how we live, transport ourselves, work, etc. It's going to be all pervasive.
So when you think about the future and the future of work, if I was going to ask you to describe that future in 2 words, and 2 words only, what 2 words would you use? And then you can elaborate.
Effortless and enjoyable.
Ooh, I like those. Tell me more.
Effortless, because if you look at everything we've done, like every creation of mankind or humankind has been to make our lives easier. Every single thing, right? And AI is the next evolution of that. So, of course, it's going to be more effortless. If I don't have to write anymore, ChatGPT does that today. Like, we figured out writing. Like, that's why it captured everyone's imagination. Like, it could creatively write cogent, well-structured, long essays, for example, right? It could write a whole script. So I think effortless is, now think about that and multiply that into every little thing. And I think I would encourage people to think about, if you're doing something today, like, is there an AI that could make that experience easier, faster, and more effortless? And the capability to do that may not exist today, but it surely could be figured out in the future. Enjoyable, because if you take away the mundane aspect of what we do, then if I had to put in an Excel sheet and I don't have to do a pivot table, and I could just tell this thing, here's the data, do a pivot table, and give me the insight. What is this telling me? The mundane aspect of creating this pivot table is gone. Where we thrive as humans is using our intelligence. And so if we could provide that added layer of, we can just focus on that more and more and forget about what needs to get done, the nitty-gritty details, perhaps that's an enjoyable future.
I mean, that kind of future sounds exciting to me. It sounds like a future that's very creative and strategic, and I think people can get on board with that. So super, super interesting to talk to you today. I really, really got a lot out of this, and I really appreciate you being here and talking to us about what you're working on. And I'm excited to follow and find out what you do in the future. So thank you for being on.
No, my pleasure is all mine, Boaz. Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Karthik as our guest on today's episode. Karthik's experience with ML and AI and his focus on responsible use of this technology was fascinating to explore. If you want to learn more about Karthik, you can find him on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you're interested in how he thinks about responsible AI, definitely connect with him and keep up with his posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to the episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and to the Simply AI weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is brought to you and sponsored by Simply Augmented, and our theme music was created by Dave Angel.